Welcome everyone to part 2 of this Blender tutorial series where we're creating this magical mushroom scene. So this is part 2. If you haven't seen part 1, then definitely check that out. I will have a link in the description. So this is where we left off in part 1. So we had modeled the mushrooms and then we texture painted it and set up the materials. And in this part, we're going to be finishing all of the rest of the scene. So we're going to be creating the background and the ground and using geometry nodes to set up the different things on the ground and the lighting and rendering and things like that. And then in part 3, we will be doing the animation. As I said in part 1, if you'd like to help support me and this channel, then you can purchase the tutorial files on my Gumroad store, and you can also get the tutorial files on my Patreon page. So checking out my Gumroad store and Patreon page are great ways to help support me and this channel. And another great way to help support me and this channel is by checking out the YouTube memberships by clicking right down there on the join button next to the subscribe button. And then just one more thing before we start, I wanted to thank this video's sponsor, Sketchfab. Sketchfab is a 3D model marketplace where you can buy, sell, and even upload your own 3D models and preview them in your browser. You can also purchase models and assets from Sketchfab's huge 3D model store. Use the model inspector to preview the wireframe, matcap, textures, and more before you purchase. Check out Sketchfab with the link in the description. Alright, so to start off with this part, I'm going to be adding a camera and just sticking it right here, pointed at the mushrooms. So I'm going to press Shift A, and let's go right down here, and I'm going to add a camera. So what we can do is we can just move our view to wherever we want the camera to be, and then you can press Control Alt Numpad 0. So Control Alt Numpad 0 is going to bring the camera to where we are. And then I want to render this with a square image. You could render it just at the default how it is right now, but I'm going to click right over here on the output properties. So on both of these resolution values, I'm going to change the number to 2560 by 2560. And that is a nice, very high quality image. Of course, you don't have to render it that large, but I want to have a very nice high quality image, and we are using Blender Eevee, so it will render pretty fast. If you wanted to though, you could of course just leave this at the default of 1920 by 1080, or you could also set it to like 1920 by 1920. Alright, now I want to center the camera to the mushrooms, so I'm going to press G to grab, and that is going to move the camera around. I'll just click to place it there. And then I do want to turn the camera's focal length up, because I think it looks a lot better if the focal length is turned up. So if the camera is selected, you can click right here, and this is going to go to the object data properties. Now right here you can see there's a focal length. So the default is 50, but I want to click on this and I'm going to type in 90. And now that we've set that to 90, everything looks a little bit more flat, and I think it does look really nice. And then let's also press G to grab and then hit the Z key twice, and that is going to bring the camera in and out. And I'll just bring it right over here. You can also double tap the R key, and that is going to enable the trackball rotation. So just kind of put the camera wherever you want. Now I am going to be using the Eevee render engine in this tutorial. So right over here on the render properties, on the render engine right here, I'm just going to set this to Blender Eevee. So I can now hold down the Z button and go up into the rendered view, and you can see it's all gray. That's because we don't have any HDRI. It's just gray all around, but we are using Blender Eevee. Now to make Eevee look a little bit nicer, I'm going to check mark the ambient occlusion and the bloom and the screen space reflections. And then I really don't want any motion blur just because there's nothing moving around that fast, so I'm not going to turn on the motion blur. And then to make the scene more contrasty and kind of pop out the colors, I'm going to go right down here to the color management, and on the view transform, I'm just going to have this set to filmic, but then on the look here, I'm going to click on this and I'm going to change it to high contrast, and that'll pop out the colors and make things more contrasty and make the final scene look nicer. Alright, so I now want to make the lighting look a lot better, so we're going to be adding in that HDRI that I talked about at the beginning of the tutorial. So to add in the HDRI, we're going to click right here on the world properties, and then just make sure you've added a new world. On default, there already is a world right here in the world settings. So to add in the HDRI, I'm just going to click on this yellow dot here next to the color, and I'm going to change this to the environment texture, and then we can click on open. And here is the Canon 1K HDR, and this is a free free HDRI from polyhaven.com. Link is in the description if you'd like to download it. So I'm just going to click on it and then click on open image. And you can see this is already giving some really nice lighting on the mushrooms. Now I don't want to be able to see the world in the background. I want the world to be transparent. So what I'm going to do is go right here to the render properties. So the render properties. And then I'm going to go down here and open up the film tab. And then I'm going to click on the transparent button. And that way now the world is still lighting up the scene, but we can't actually see the HDRI. It's transparent in the background. Let's press Ctrl S again to save the project. Alright, so now I'm going to be modeling the ground object. So I'm going to hold down the Z button, go back into the solid view, and I'll click with my middle mouse wheel to just kind of move out of the camera's perspective. So I'm going to press Shift A, and let's go right up here to Mesh, and I'm going to add a circle. And then right above me, if you click on the Add Circle settings, I'm just going to leave this at the default of 32 because I do want it to be pretty detailed. So I will just close that. So I'm going to press the Tab key to go into Edit mode, and I can just scale this down. Then I'm going to press E to extrude and then S to scale, and we're going to scale this up. E to extrude and S to scale. Let's scale this up even more. And then E to extrude and then S to scale. Click to place that. And then I can press G and Z and we're going to bring it down a little bit. And then I'll press E to extrude again and S to scale again. Bring that out and then press G and Z and we're going to bring that down, and we'll do that one more time. So E to extrude and then S to scale, place it there, and then G to grab, and we'll hit Z to bring it down on the Z axis. And then I'm also going to zoom into the middle, and then I'm going to hold down the Alt key and just select that loop of vertices, and I can press the F key and that's going to fill a face right there. And then I can press Tab to go back to object mode. And then using the object context menu, I'm just going to shade this smooth. So now I want to give it a subdivision surface modifier so that it has a lot more detail. So to add the subdivision surface, I'm going to press Ctrl 2. Ctrl 2 is going to add a subdivision surface modifier. If you click on the modifier properties, you can see right there is a subdivision surface. Now I want to give this object a displacement modifier to make it all bumpy and make it look like dirt. Now before I add the displacement, I do want to have lots of detail. So I'm going to turn the viewport and render levels both up really high to like a 5, and that way they're going to be very subdivided and there will be lots of detail that the displacement can use. So let's now click on add modifier, and I'm going to go right down here under deform and add the displace modifier. Now we need to add some sort of texture so that it can actually displace it. So let's click on the new button right here to add a new texture, and then I can click right here to show the texturing tab. Now right now the type is set to image or movie, but I don't want to add an image or movie. I want to click right here and I want to instead change it to clouds. So the clouds is basically just like a procedural noise texture. Now I want to take this depth here and I want to turn the depth all the way up to the max, which is 24. So that it has more detail. All right, that's looking pretty cool. Let's also turn the size down, or actually turn the size up. I just don't want it to be that big, so something like that is pretty good. So now you can see we have all this really nice bump here. Now it is way too strong, so let's click right back over here on the modifier properties, and we can just turn the strength value down, and now that's looking much better. So I think I will go with like maybe a 0.3. I think that is a pretty good strength. Now later in this tutorial, we are going to be adding geometry nodes to this object, and so we're going to use geometry nodes to place some little mushrooms and grass and rocks around. And because of that, we're also going to be doing weight painting later in this tutorial. We're going to use weight painting to tell the geometry nodes where we want the objects to be placed. And so if we're doing weight painting, then it's better if we apply these modifiers so that this is an actual geometry instead of just these modifiers. So to apply these modifiers, you can just click on the drop down and then click on apply, click on the drop down and click on apply. So now if I press the tab key to go into edit mode, you can see this is a very, very high detailed mesh. Now in edit mode, I also want to edit the shape of the object, because if I press the 0 key to go into the camera view and tab back into object mode, you can see this kind of just looks like a little island, and I want the dirt to kind of go out farther and kind of come up on the sides. So I'm going to press the tab key to go back into edit mode, and I'm just going to select a vertex, which is kind of right here on the back. So now I'm going to press the O O key, and the O key is going to turn on this proportional editing. So now that the proportional editing is on, I can press G to grab, and then I can scroll with my mouse wheel, and that is going to change the size of the proportional editing. And so any vertices which are nearby the selected one is going to be pulled along with it. So I'm just going to do that. I'm just going to select a vertex, press G to grab, and just kind of bring this out. We're basically just kind of stretching it out, and I'm just stretching this out because I want it to go farther into the background. So if I press the 0 on the numpad, that's going to go to the camera view. You can basically see what's happening. So I want it to be even farther, so I'm going to bring this out, just stretch the background out a little bit, and you're not going to be able to see it in too much detail, so I don't mind if it's stretched a little bit. I'm just going to bring that out there. So now you can see in the camera view that ground goes out much farther. If I tab back into object mode, you can see how that's looking. So I'm going to go back into edit mode and just kind of select some of these pieces and kind of move them around. You could also scroll with your mouse wheel to make the proportional editing smaller. And I'm just going to kind of bring this up, just kind of make some lumpy parts here and there just by selecting a vertex, pressing G to grab, and then you can scroll with the mouse wheel. And I think I want this to be even farther, so I'm going to press G to grab, just kind of pull this out even farther, so something like that. So now if I press the tab key to go back to object mode, you can see how this is looking. So it does look a little bit weird from this view, but from the camera view now we have lots of detail up close where you're going to see it, but then it just kind of looks like there is a little bit of dirt farther away. So that is exactly what I want. All right, so I'm now going to be creating a very basic procedural dirt material. So I'm going to select this object, and then let's go right up here to the shading tab, and that way we can actually make procedural nodes. So I'm going to hold down the Z button and go up into the rendered view so I can preview how this is looking. And then right over here on the shader nodes, we're going to click on new here, and I can just rename this to dirt. All right, so I'm now going to press Shift A, and let's go to the search here, and I'm going to search for a noise texture. We're going to use a noise texture to create the procedural dirt, and let's just stick the noise texture down here. Now, in the last part of this tutorial series, we turned on the Node Wrangler add-on. If you don't have the Node Wrangler add-on turned on though, you can go to Edit, and then you can open up the preferences. And then right over here on the add-ons tab, you can go to the search, and you can just search for the Node Wrangler, and then just check mark the Node Wrangler add-on, and then you can close the user preferences. So now that the Node Wrangler is turned on, I can hold down the Control and Shift key, and then I can select different nodes. And that is going to preview that node on the object. So I can see that procedural noise on this object. Now with this noise texture selected, I'm also going to press Control T, and that is going to add the texture coordinate and mapping. Now I don't need the mapping, so I'm going to select the mapping and press X to delete it. And then let's take the object, and I'm going to plug the object up to the vector, and that way it's going to use the object coordinates. And I'll press the 0 to go into the camera view. Now on this noise texture, I'm going to take the scale here, and I'm going to turn this way up to like a 15, so there's lots of noise. And then let's also turn the detail all the way to the max, which is 15, so there's much more detail. And I'm going to turn the roughness value up as well, so I'm just going to turn it up a little bit to like a 0.55. All right, so we can now plug this into the base color. So let's take the factor, and I'm going to plug this up to the base color of the principled, and then I can Control Shift and select the principled to preview it. Now right now you can see it's just looking like white and black, but I instead want this to look like dirt. So I'm going to press Shift A, let's go to the search here, and I'm going to search for a color ramp node, and let's just drop the color ramp node right in here. So it's going to be between the noise texture and the principled. So we can now just change the color ramp colors, and that's going to make the colors of the dirt. So just click on the white tab right here, and I'm going to click on this color right here, and I'm going to make it a kind of an orangey color, kind of a light orange, and then I'm going to make it very dark. And so this is going to make a nice brown color. So you can see that is looking much more like dirt. So I also want the noise texture to contribute to the roughness so that some parts are a little bit more rough and other parts are a little bit more shiny. So let's take the factor right here, and I'm going to put this into the roughness. Now I want to be able to control this better because I want it to mostly be rough. So I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search here, and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and let's just drop the color ramp right here. Now if we make the colors more white, that's going to tell it to be more rough. And because this is dirt, I do want it to be pretty rough. So let's click on the black tab, and I'm going to make this much brighter, and you can see now it's going to be more rough. So just something like that. And then I also want the noise texture to be going into the normal to give it some bump. So let's take the factor, and I'm going to plug that into the normal. Now this is normal data, but this is black and white data. So we need something to convert this into normal data. So I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search here, and I'm going to search for the bump node, and let's drop the bump node right into this wire. So you can see that the black and white factor data is going to go into the height value. We actually want to put this into the height value, and then that is going to convert the black and white data into normal data. You can see now it comes out as a purple one, which is normal. So then that can go into the normal, and now if I zoom in here, you can see it's very, very bumpy. Now that is way too strong, and I don't want it to be that strong. So let's just take the strength value right here, and I'm going to turn this way down to like a 0.4, and that way it's going to be much less strong. So there we go. We now have a very basic procedural dirt texture. One thing that I want to do though is change the scale of this noise texture, because I do think it is very small. So on the scale here, I'm going to change this to like an 8. So I'm going to change it to an 8, and I think that is a bit better. Let's press Control S again to save. And then just one more thing that I want to do, I want the dirt to be very black and dark and not be very reflective. So to make it less reflective, I'm just going to take the specular value right here, and I'm going to turn it way down to like a 0.25, maybe even just like a 0.2. That way it's very dark and you're not able to see it very well, just because I want it to be a very dark dirt color and I don't want to be able to see it too well. I mostly want to have the attention on the mushrooms. Alright, so I'm now going to be duplicating this mushroom and making the gray mushrooms, and then we'll be using geometry nodes to place the gray mushrooms on the dirt. So I'm going to select this object and then hold down the Shift key and select this object. I'm now going to press Shift D. So Shift D is going to duplicate whatever you have selected. Let's bring this down here. And actually, we're not going to be using the shader nodes for now. So let's go back right over here to the layout. And then I can press the period on the numpad to zoom over to this. So I'm going to press S to scale, and I'm going to scale this quite a bit farther down. And let's bring it up. But I do want to put it underneath the dirt because I don't want to be able to see it in the scene, because we're just creating the object, which is going to be distributed using geometry nodes. So I'm just going to have it right here underneath the dirt. Now I want both of these objects to just be one object, so I'm going to select this object and then hold down the Shift key and select the other object. And then I'm going to press Control J, and Control J is going to join them together. Now if I hold down the Z button and go up into the rendered view, you can see these are still using the blue colors. And I don't want to use those blue materials because I want this smaller mushroom to be a gray mushroom. So I'm going to click right here on the material properties and just make this a bit bigger. And what I'm going to do is delete the mushroom stem. So I'm going to click on the mushroom stem right here and then click on the minus to get rid of it. Now for the mushroom top, I want to duplicate this material to make it separate. So to make it a separate material, I'm going to click right here, and that is going to duplicate the material. And I can just rename this to mushroom gray. So now this is called mushroom gray, but you can see it's still using the image there that we painted. So let's go right up here to the shading tab, and then we can play around with this. So you can see this is a separate material because this is mushroom gray. So we can change this material and it's not going to affect the other mushrooms. So what I will do is just select this color map that we painted, and I'm going to press the X key to delete it. And then I instead want to take the color here from this noise texture, and I'm going to plug it up to the base color. Now I want to be able to control the colors, so let's press Shift A, and I'm going to go to the search here, and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and let's just drop the color ramp right here. So now we can play around with these colors to make it a gray mushroom. So I'm first going to bring these two tabs together because I want them to be a little bit more contrasty. And then on the white tab here, I'm just going to make this kind of like a light gray. So I'll make this a bit darker. And then on this block tab right here, I'm just going to make this a bit of a darker gray. So something like that. And then right here on this noise texture, I also want to take the scale and I want to turn this up to like a 4, just so that you can see a little bit more of that. And then another thing that I want to do is turn the roughness up a little bit so it's not quite as shiny. So let's take the roughness value and I'm going to turn this up to like a 0.6, so it's a little bit more of a rough mushroom. That is a little bit rough though, so maybe just like a 0.55. I think that's a bit better. So that is it for the material. So let's go right back over here to the layout now. Now I want to create 2 of these mushrooms so that there's a little bit of a variation. So I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate, and I'm going to bring this mushroom over here, and then I can just kind of rotate it. Let's just kind of rotate it. And I'm also going to press the Tab key to go into edit mode. I can press the A key to deselect everything, and then with my mouse hovered over the top here, I'm going to press the L key, and that is going to select the linked vertices. And then we need to turn off the proportional editing, so you can press the O key or just click right there to turn it off. And then I can press R to rotate and G to grab. I can also press S to scale and scale it up on the Z axis. And I'm just going to make this mushroom a little bit different. I'm also going to hold down the Z button and go into the wireframe. And then I can also press B for the box select. And I'm just going to box select some of these vertices. And I can just kind of rotate them and move them around. A to deselect everything, B for the box select, just box select that one. And let's just kind of rotate it and move it around, and then A to deselect and B for the box select. Just box select those vertices, and I can just press R to rotate and just kind of rotate them. Hold down the Z button, go back into the solid view, and I can press tab to go back to object mode. I can also just give this a random rotation. So now we have two mushrooms which are slightly different. And actually I think I'm going to tab to go back into edit mode, hold down the Z button, go into wireframe, A to deselect everything, and I'll press B for the box select. I'm just going to box select a bunch of these vertices, and then I can press G to grab and just kind of move them down. B for the box select, just box select those vertices, and G to grab and kind of move those down, just so that one of the mushrooms is a little bit smaller. And then tab to go back into object mode. Alright, let's press Ctrl S to save. And I want to hold down the Z button and move up into the rendered mode again so I can see the material. So now I want to apply the scale of these objects because I want these objects to be smaller in the geometry nodes. So I'm going to select the mushroom, hold down the shift key and select the other mushroom, and then I'm going to press Ctrl A and I'm going to apply the scale. Now when you apply the scale, you can see that it's going to change the size of the noise texture. So real quick, if you want to, you can go back over to the shading tab, and then right here on this noise texture, you can just turn the scale up. So I think I will turn it up to, just maybe like a 25 or something, so I can see that a little bit better. Maybe just like a 20. I think that is pretty good. So I'll go back to the layout now and I'll press Ctrl S to save. Now there is one more important thing. You can see that the origin points are way up there, and that is not what I want, because I want the origin points to be right down here on the bottom, and that way when they're on this object using the geometry nodes, they're going to be sticking up from the bottom. So what I'm going to do is tab into edit mode, and then I will double tap the A key to select everything. I can press period on the numpad to zoom into it, and then I can press G to grab, and let's bring this up on the Z axis, and I'm just going to bring it up to about there, and then tab back into object mode, and that way when we add this to the geometry nodes, it's going to be added right there, so the dirt is going to be right there on the ground. So let's select this object. I'm going to press tab to go into edit mode, press the A key to make sure everything is selected, and I can press G to grab, and let's bring this up on the Z axis, press G to grab, and I'm just going to stick this right over there. Tab back into object mode, and that is really good. Alright, so I'm now going to be creating the stylized grass. So let's press Shift A. I'm going to go here to mesh, and I'm going to add a cube. Let's zoom out here, and I'm going to press S to scale and G to grab, and we're going to stick the stylized grass way down here next to these mushrooms. And I'll also bring it forward a bit. Alright, so I'm now going to press the tab key, and that's going to take me to edit mode, and then I'm going to click right here to go to the face select, and then I'm going to select this face. So I can now press E to extrude, and then S to scale, and R to rotate, and G to grab. We're just modeling a basic stylized grass blade, and then I'll press E to extrude and S to scale, and then R to rotate and G to grab, and then one more time I'll press E to extrude and S to scale. We're just going to make that little piece of grass there. Alright, now I want to smooth this out, so I'm going to press Ctrl 2. Ctrl 2 is going to add a subdivision surface with 2 levels, and then I also want to use the object context menu and shade it smooth. And then I don't need the face that's right down there, so I'm going to tab into edit mode. Make sure you are on the face select, and I'm just going to select this face, and then I can press X to delete, and we want to delete the faces. Alright, so now that is much straighter at the bottom. Let's tab to go back to object mode. And then one more thing that I want to do, I want to select this face right here, and I'll press G to grab and S to scale, just to make that a bit sharper there on the top. Alright, so now in edit mode, I want to double tap the A key to select everything, and I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate. I'll press S to scale this down, and then I want to hit R to rotate. I'll rotate it on the Z axis and just kind of rotate that facing away. Let's scale it up a little bit more actually, and then rotate it over and move it over. And I'm just going to make kind of a little clump of grass. So put that there. Then I'm going to hold down the Z button, go to wireframe, and then I can click right here, and that's going to go to the vertex select. I can press B for the box select, but this time I'm going to click and hold with my middle mouse wheel and then let go, and that is going to deselect the bottom part. And then I can press R to rotate and G to grab and just stick that down there. And then I can press the L key with my mouse hovered over that piece of grass. That's going to select the linked vertices. And I can press Shift D to duplicate, R to rotate, and S to scale. And let's just make another piece here. All right, just rotate that over, hold down the Z button, go back into the solid view, and just make a little clump of grass. So you can go back to object mode and see how that's looking. And that is what I want. All right, so now in object mode, I want to duplicate this and make one more variation, just kind of like how we did with the mushroom. So I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate, and let's bring this over. And then I can tab to go into edit mode. I can hold down the Z button, go over to the wireframe and let go. And then I can press Shift D to duplicate, and then I'll press R to rotate and rotate it over on the Z axis. Let's scale this down and rotate it, and I'm just going to stick it right in here. Just kind of stick it right there, and then press B for the box select. I'm going to click with my mouse wheel and drag a box around there. That's going to deselect those vertices, and I can just kind of rotate them and scale them. Tab back into object mode, hold down the Z button and go back into the solid view, and that is pretty good. And that's pretty good, but I do want to make it slightly different still. So I'm going to tab into edit mode, hold down the Z button, go into the wireframe. I can press A to deselect everything, B for the box select, just box select some of these vertices and just kind of move them around, play around with the shape of that. So just kind of make them look a little bit different. And I'm also going to press the A key to select everything, and I can rotate this on the Z axis and just give the entire thing a random rotation. All right, go back into object mode, and that is looking very good. All right, so now let's hop over to the shading tab so that we can create a material for the grass. So just select the grass, and then right up here on the shader nodes, I'm going to click on new, and I'm going to rename this material to grass. So this material is going to be pretty simple. Let's just take the base color, and I'm going to make that like a really bright green color, but then just make it a little bit darker. And then I do want to add a little bit of subsurface scattering right here. So I'm going to turn the subsurface up to just like a 0.1. So there's a little bit of subsurf. And then on the subsurface color, let's make this like a yellowish color. So something like that. And then we can also click and drag right here, and we can drop this material onto this object as well. And then just like we did with these mushrooms, I want to apply the scale. So hold down the shift key and just select both of the blades of grass. I'm going to press Control A, and we want to apply the scale. So that is now its default scale. And let's also turn the roughness down. So I'm going to turn the roughness down to like a 0.3 just so that it's more shiny. Let's go back to the layout, and I'm going to press Control S to save. And one other really important thing, make sure that the origin point is kind of about there, so it's pretty close to the bottom. You can tab into edit mode and press the A key to select everything, and then press G to grab and just move that if you need to, but for me the origin point is in the correct position. Alright, now there is one more set of objects that I want to create. I want to create some tiny little pebbles or rocks. So to do this, I'm going to be using Blender's built-in rock generator. So to turn on the rock generator, let's click right here on edit, and then I'm going to open up the preferences. And then right over here on the add-ons tab, if you go here to the search, I'm going to search for extra, and I'm going to check mark the add mesh extra objects add-on. So it's built into Blender, so you can just check mark it, and then you can just close the user preferences. So now that the add mesh extra objects add-on is turned on, you can press Shift A, and you can go right down here to mesh, and you can see there is some different new objects here. And I want to click on the rock generator. So this is going to generate different rocks for us. Now if you click right above me on the add rocks, just click on that, and that's going to open up some settings. You could play around with these things if you want to, but I just want to have some very simple low poly rocks because we're going to be putting them all around on the dirt, and so they need to be pretty simple and low poly. Although right here on the number of rocks, I do want to turn this up to 3 so that there are 3 rocks. That way there's going to be 3 different variations, and then I can just close the add rocks right there. Alright, so I can now click on these rocks, press G to grab, and I'm just going to move them out, and then I can shift select all of them. So just hold down the shift key and select all of them. I can scale them down and bring them right over here. We're going to bring them right next to all of these other objects. And then what you can do is you can change the shape of them. So I'm going to press the period on the numpad to zoom into them. And so for instance, like this object, this rock is a little bit of a weird shape. So I can press the tab key to go into edit mode. I can select a vertex and press G to grab, and I can just play around with the shape of it to make it look a little bit like a better rock. Maybe like that, maybe even like shift select some of these pieces and bring them down. Something like that is a bit better. Maybe scale that up a little bit. All right, now I want to apply these modifiers, and I don't want to turn up these levels here on these subsurf. If you wanted to make them very high quality rocks with lots of detail, you could turn up the viewport levels, and you can see now there's going to be a lot more quality. You can see all the little details in there, but again, these are just going to be tiny little pebbles scattered all over the dirt, and so I don't want to be able to preview that much detail because that's just going to make the scene more laggy. So I'm going to turn the levels viewport just to like a 2 here on these subdivision surface modifiers. And then we also have the displacement modifiers, which is displacing the rocks. Now I want to apply all of the modifiers for all of these rock objects. So instead of manually applying each modifier, I'm just going to hold down the shift key and just shift select all the rocks. Then I can click on object, and I'm going to go way down here to convert, and then I can just click on mesh, and that is going to just apply all the modifiers. So if I tab into edit mode, you can see now we just have these somewhat low poly rocks. Now I want to make them even more low poly, but first what I want to do is fix this little problem right here. So you can see that there's some weird shading issues right here. There's like kind of a sharp area, and this is because if we click right here on the object data properties, we can go right here and open up the normals, and you can see that there is this auto smooth turned on. So I just want to turn off the auto smooth, click on this rock, turn off the auto smooth, and then click on this rock and turn off the auto smooth. All right, now if you tab into edit mode, these rocks are still somewhat high quality, and I want to make them even more low poly. So to do this, let's click right here on the modifier properties, and I can click on add modifier, and I'm going to add the decimate modifier. So now if I drag this ratio value down, it's going to take away more and more of the mesh, but still keep the geometry shape. So I'm going to turn this way down to maybe just like a 0.2, and then you can click on the arrow here and click on apply. So now if I tab into edit mode, you can see we have a very low poly rock. Let's click on the next rock. We'll click on add modifier, and I'm going to add the decimate modifier. And again, on the ratio, you can turn this way down to something like a 0.1 or a 0.2, and then click on the drop down and click on apply. So you can see that is a very low poly rock if you tap into edit mode. Let's click on this rock here. You can see this could be lower poly as well. Let's click on add modifier. We can add the decimate modifier, and we can make the ratio way down to just like a 0.1 or a 0.2, and then click on the drop down and click on apply. You can also just press Ctrl A with your mouse hovered over the modifier, and that's going to apply it. So now we have some pretty low poly rocks. And then I also want to center the origin point into the center of these objects. So just make sure all the objects are selected, all of these pebbles, and I'm going to click on object, and I'm going to click on set origin, and then let's click on origin to geometry. So now the origin point is going to be in the center of those pebbles. And then I also want this to be the default scale because I want them to be very small. So let's press Ctrl A, and I can click on apply scale. So that is now the default scale. And then I can hold down the Z button, go up into the rendered view to preview the shaders, and you can see that they don't have any material. So let's click on the object. We can click right here on the material properties. Let's click on the drop down, and I want to add the dirt material. So then what we can do is we can click and drag, and we can drop this dirt material onto all the other pebbles. So now those pebbles have that dirt material. All right, that's really good. Let's press Ctrl S to save. So now that we've created all the objects for the geometry nodes, I'm going to click on this object right here. Just go back into the solid view, just select the dirt object, and then I want to click on this plus right up here, and that's going to add a new workspace. And I want to go to general, and then I want to open up the geometry nodes editor. All right, so we're in the geometry nodes editor. Now these values right here, we really don't need to see this. So to close this window, I can just click right here when the crosshair appears, hold down my mouse, drag over, and let go, and that's going to close that. And then I want to split this sideways just because I prefer that better. So right when your mouse turns into those little arrows going up and down in the center, I'm going to right click, and then I'm going to click on vertical split. Then I'm going to just click right there in the center, and that is going to split it. And then right here when the crosshair appears, I can click, drag up, and let go. And then right here, I'm going to click, drag down, and then let go. This is just personal preference. You can of course set this up however you like, but I like the 3D space being over here and then the geometry nodes over here. And then I'm also going to press the T key, and the T key is going to close that side panel. And then I'm also going to click on this button right here, and this is going to turn off the gizmo so that I can't see that. And then let's also press the 0 on the numpad to go into the camera's view. So just make sure you have the dirt object selected, and then let's click on new here to add new geometry nodes. So I'm going to press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for the distribute points on faces, and I'm just going to drop the distribute points on faces right there. I'm also going to press Shift A, let's go go to the search, and I'm going to search for instance, and I'm going to use the instance on points node. Let's just drop that right there. Now I want to be able to see the original geometry, so let's press Shift A, go to the search, and I'm going to search for the join geometry, and let's stick the join geometry right there. And then the original geometry can go up to the join geometry, and that way we can preview the original geometry. Now I need to tell the geometry nodes what object they're going to be instancing, and so I actually want to use a collection. So what I'm going to do is hold down the Shift key and just shift select all of the mushrooms and the grass. I now want to bring these into their own collection, so I'm going to press the M key, and then I can click on new collection, and I can just call this grass and mushrooms. All right, grass and mushrooms, click on OK. So right over here, if you open this up and click on this to minimize the outliner or minimize this collection, you can see we have this normal collection and this has all the other objects, but then we have this new collection and this is the grass and the mushrooms. And if you click on the arrow to open this up, these are all of those objects, so these small grass objects and these small mushrooms. So all of these 4 objects are now in their own collection. So we can click back on the geometry nodes, and I can now press Shift A. Let's go to the search here, and I'm going to search for the collection info. So just click on the collection info, and I'm going to drop it down here. So we can now plug the geometry into the instance on points. So now we just need to choose a collection that it's going to instance. So we can click right here, and then I can just click on the grass and mushrooms. All right, now it's added the grass and mushrooms, but there's a few problems. The grass and the mushrooms aren't actually placed on the dirt. So to fix this, I'm going to check mark the separate children, the reset children, and then I'm also going to check mark the pick instance. And now that is looking much better. So I can hold down the Z button and go up into the rendered mode to preview that. Now I want to give these objects some random scale and random rotation so that they look a little bit different. So I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search here, and I'm going to search for a random value node, and let's drop the random value right here. So I can take the value and I'm going to plug that up to the scale, and that way it's going to have random values between the minimum value and the maximum value. So the minimum value right here, that's going to be the smallest value that the object can be, and then the maximum value is the largest value that the object can be. So you can just drag the minimum value up until they are somewhat small, but I do want them to be a bit bigger. I don't want any of them to be too crazy small, but then I do want to turn the maximum value down as well. Let's also turn the minimum value down, and each object is just going to have a slightly different random scale. So I also want to have a slight change in the rotation so that some objects are just rotated over a little bit, and then I also want them to be rotated around on the Z-axis, and that'll make them look more random. So I'm going to take the random value node, and I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate this, and let's drop it here. Now I want to take the float here, and I want to change this to vector, and when I change it to vector, that is going to split up the values into the X, the Y, and the Z. So I can now take the value and let's plug this into the rotation. All right, so now on the maximum value here, I want to click, drag down, and let go. Click, drag down, and let go, and that's going to change all the values at the same time. And I just want a tiny little bit of random value, so I'm going to change this to like a 0.25, change it to like a 0.25, and you can see now some of these objects are just rotated over slightly. But then I want all of the objects to have a bunch of random rotation on the Z-axis. So right here on this value, this is the Z-axis. I can just make this a giant number, so I'm just going to type in like 100, and that way now all the objects are kind of randomly rotated around on the Z-axis. And that is what I want. All right, so that's looking really good. Now you can see some of these objects are going through each other. So to fix this, I'm going to click right here on the distribute points on faces, and I'm going to click on the random, and I'm going to change this instead to Poisson disk. So now that we've set this to Poisson disk, we can turn up the distance min, and this way if I turn it up, there aren't going to be any objects overlapping because it's going to set a distance value and it's going to separate them by that distance. So now you can see, because I've turned up the distance value, you can see that there's much more of an even spacing between these objects, between all the different objects. Now I don't want to turn the distance up too crazy high because I do want some of them to be a little bit closer to each other and then some of them a little bit farther, but I don't want to have any of them overlapping. A few are okay if they're kind of pretty close to each other, but I don't want to have a ton of overlap. So you can just turn up the distance min to a value that looks good, and to make the movements more sensitive, you can hold down the Shift key as you drag the value value, and that's going to make the movements more sensitive when you're changing that value. So just something like that is pretty good. Now I don't want there to be objects all over the place. I want to be able to weight paint where I want the objects to be. So I'm going to click on the object, and then I'm going to click right up here. I actually need to scroll over, and let's click on the object mode, and I'm going to instead change this to weight painting. All right, now if you click right up here, you can see this is set to draw, and that is fine. So what I can do is I can just click around, and that is going to add color. And I can also press the F key, and the F key is going to make my brush bigger. So we're basically just painting a color map. So where it is blue, there isn't going to be any of the objects, but then where it is red, there's going to be lots of those objects. Now we can't really see it taking effect, and that is because we need to actually set it up with the weight painting. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the density factor, and I'm going to plug the density factor up to this group input right there. So now that we've set that up, if I drag this out, you can see we have the density factor value right over here, and this is on the modifier properties. Now I don't want to use one random value. I don't want to use a value from 0 to 1. I actually want to use the weight painting. So we're going to click on this button, which is the input attribute toggle. So now instead of using a number value, we can actually use the weight painting. So I'm going to click on this, and then we're going to click on the point group float, and that is going to use the weight painting. So now you can see wherever I paint, that is where it's going to show up. So I'm just going to continue to paint here, and I want to add a bit more of those objects because you can see there's a bunch of places where there aren't any of the objects. So on the density max right here, I can just turn that up, and that is going to put more of those objects in that area. And I can actually go back here to the layout to do this just so that we have a bit more space. So now you can just go along here and you can just add values just by tapping around and clicking, and that's going to add objects. You can also go into the camera view by pressing the 0 on the numpad, and then you can just kind of click around, and wherever you want objects, you can just add them. So just paint around. You can also turn the strength value down by dragging the strength value, and then that way when you paint, it's not going to be quite as strong, so there aren't going to be quite as many of them quite so fast. So I'm just going to click around, just kind of tap around. You could use a drawing tablet for this if you wanted to, but it's pretty easy to do with my mouse. And every now and then press the 0 on the numpad to go into the camera view because it should look good from the camera's perspective. So just adding some here and there. I don't want to add too many, but just some little bits here and there. And then if for some reason you've added more than you want, what you can do is click right here on the brushes, and you can change this to subtract. So now you can start to paint, and I actually want to make the strength smaller, and I'm also going to turn the radius up. So now I can start to paint, and it's going to get rid of color instead of adding color. So I can just go along here, and if I added too many, I can just go along and I can get rid of some of that color, and that's going to get rid of those objects. All right, so that is pretty good. We can always change this later if we want to, but I'm going to click on the weight paint, and I'm going to change this back to object mode, and then I can hold down the Z button and go up into the rendered view to preview that. So that is looking really good. I like how that is. Let's press Control S again to save, and then I'm going to go right back over here to the geometry nodes editor, and I can press the 0 on the numpad to preview that. Now we still don't have those pebbles, and so I'm actually going to duplicate these nodes, and I'm going to create a separate node setup over here, which is going to add the rocks. And why I'm doing this separately is because I want there to be rocks all over the object, not just in the place that we weight painted, but all over the object. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to put the pebbles into their own collection. So I'm going to zoom in here to the pebbles and then select the pebble, hold down the shift key and select the other pebbles. I'm now going to press the M key, and the M key is going to bring up the move settings. I'm going to click on new collection, and I can just rename this to pebbles and then click on OK. So now right up here on the collections, you can see we have the pebble collections with those pebbles just in that collection. So let's just click back here to select the dirt, and I'll just make this a bit bigger, and then we can add that. So we're actually going to use a very similar node setup. So what I can do is I can just press B for the box select. I'm just going to box select all the nodes right in here, and then I'm going to press Control Shift D. So Shift D will duplicate the nodes, but if you press Control Shift D, that is going to duplicate the nodes, but it's going to keep everything plugged up. So I'm just going to drag all these nodes right up here and just kind of bring them up here. Now there are a few things that we need to change. One thing that I want to change is the collection info. So if I just make this bigger, I don't want to use the grass and the mushroom collection. So I'm going to click on the X to delete that. And then if I click right here, I want to change this instead to the pebbles. And then another thing that I want to do is unplug the density factor because I don't want to use the weight paint. So I'm going to unplug the density factor. All right, let's bring this down here. And I can also take the group output and I want to bring that over there. So I want to take the join geometry and I want to plug it in here. So what I can actually do is I can just take this join geometry and I want to plug the geometry up to this one as well, so that we're adding them all together. And then I want to take this join geometry and I want to plug that into the final group output. So now you can see that it's joining them together. So if I press B for the box select, just box select these nodes right up here are adding the pebbles. So then we're adding that together with this node setup down here with this join geometry. So now you can see we have those pebbles. If you zoom in there, you can see those pebbles. Now right here, if I zoom into the top node setup with the pebbles, I want to click on this random value right here, which is going into the rotation. And I want to click on the vector and I want to instead just change this to the float. And that way it'll change the X, Y, and Z values all at the same time. So I can take the value and I'm going to plug that into the rotation. And then on the minimum, I can just change this to like a 0.1. And then on the maximum here, I can make this a really big number like 100. And that way it's just going to give all the pebbles a random rotation. And then right here on the random value, you can change this as well for the scale. So I can just hold down the shift key as I drag this value, because I do want some of the pebbles to be a bit small. And then on the maximum, I do want these pebbles to also all be a bit smaller. So I'm going to bring this maximum down and you can see it's making those pebbles smaller. And it might be a little bit easier if you hold down the Z button and go back into the solid view. And that way you can see those pebbles maybe a little bit better because they're not that super dark color. All right, and then right up here on the distance min on the distribute points on faces, I want to take the distance min and I want to turn that to a 0. And that way they're going to be much more random. I don't mind if there's some overlap. I don't really care because they are just a bunch of little pebbles. And also back here on the random value on the scale, I think I'll make all of them a little bit smaller. All right, and then on the distribute points on faces, I want to add more of them. So on the density max, I can just turn this value up and that is going to add more of those pebbles. So I can now press the 0 on the numpad just to preview that. I can hold down the Z button and go up into the rendered mode and see how that's looking. So now we have a bunch of little pebbles there. And actually, I think I will make that even smaller. So right here on the random value, I'm going to make the maximum value even smaller so that they are a lot smaller. Let's turn the minimum value down as well. And the maximum value should be a little bit bigger than the minimum value. So I'm just going to turn the maximum value to like a 0.4, and then the minimum, I'm just going to change that to like a 0.2, or maybe even just like a 0.1. And the maximum value should be bigger than the minimum value. So I'm going to turn the maximum value to a 0.4 and the minimum value to a 0.1. So now we just have a bunch of little random pebbles there. And let's actually turn the density max up even more to maybe just like 150. So there are lots of those pebbles. Let's press Ctrl S again to save, and we are done with the geometry nodes. So let's click right back over here on the layout. All right, so I now want to duplicate this ground object and put another one really far in the background. So I'm going to navigate right up here. I'll hold down the Z button and go back into the solid view, and I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate, and I'm going to bring this way over here. Now I don't need all of the geometry nodes on this object because it's going to be pretty far away and we're not going to see any of this stuff. It's just going to be really blurred. So let's just go right here to the modifier properties, and we can just click on the X button, and that's going to remove the geometry nodes modifier. So just get rid of that modifier, and then we're going to bring this way out here. And then what we could also do is lower the topology because this is pretty high topology. So let's click on add modifier, and I'm going to add the decimate modifier. And then on the ratio here, let's just turn this way down to just like a 0.2 so the topology will be much less. Maybe turn it up a little bit to like a 0.3 because that's a little bit low quality, and then click right on the drop down and click on apply. All right, so we'll just wait for that to apply. Now if I tap into edit mode, the geometry is much less dense. It still is pretty dense. You could turn it down if you want to, but now what I'm going to do is tap into edit mode, and then I'm going to press S to scale, and I'm going to scale this on the X-axis, and I'm just going to make this really long. I'll press the 0 on the numpad to go into the camera view. Just scale this up on the X-axis. I can also scale it on the Z-axis to make it bigger, and then tap back into object mode. So I'm just going to scale this up and kind of put it right there, maybe even scale it down a little bit, just so that this is in the background, and that way it's just going to make it look like there's more stuff farther away in the background. And if you wanted to, you could tab into edit mode, and you could click right here to turn on the proportional editing, and then you could just select some vertices, press G to grab, and just kind of make it a little bit lumpy and random just by moving it up and down a little bit if you wanted to. I'm going to just do that a little bit. So just make some parts points, which are kind of going up and down, and then tab to go back into object mode. So I can hold down the Z button, move my mouse up into the rendered view, and you can see we now have that dirt way back there in the background. And because this is going to be really blurred in the background, I think we could make this even lower topology. So I'm just going to click on add modifier and add another decimate modifier, and then I'm going to turn the ratio down even smaller, so turn this pretty low, and then just click on the drop down and click on apply. And then I can press the 0 on the numpad to go into the camera view, and you can see that is looking pretty much the same because it is pretty far away. Now I said that we're going to be adding a depth of field to kind of focus on the mushrooms but then blur everything else, so let's do that. So you can just click right up here, and that is going to select the camera, and then you can go right down here to the object data properties, and that's going to go to the camera settings. So I'm going to check mark the depth of field, and then I'm going to open this up, and I want to create some sort of object that it can focus on. So I'm going to press Shift A, and let's go right down here to empty, and I'm going to add the plane axis. So I'm going to press G to grab, and I'm going to bring this up, and you can see that it looks like it got added into the grass and mushrooms collection, and I don't want it to be in the grass and mushrooms collection. So right up here in the outliner, I'm going to click and drag and drop the empty into the original collection, and then I can just minus these. Then I can press S to scale and G to grab, and I'm going to stick this right over here, and I'm going to stick it, if I press the period on the numpad, I'm going to bring it right over here, and I'll press the period on the numpad to zoom into it, and I'm going to bring it right here so it's kind of underneath this mushroom, kind of near the front. Just scale it down and put it right there. So why I'm using an empty object is because you can't actually see the empty in the rendered view. When it's actually rendered, you're not going to be able to see the empty, but it is right there. So just click back on the camera again, and then on the depth of field, you can click right here, and you can start to type in empty, and then just click on the empty. So now the focus is going to be on the empty. And if I zoom in there, you can see in the background, it is being pretty blurred. Now I want to turn the blur up to make it even more blurry, so I can take the f-stop value, and I'm going to turn the f-stop value really small. So now you can see it's just focusing where that empty is. So I'm just now going to click right here on this little arrow, and I'm going to turn the f-stop up, and I think maybe turning it up to like a 0.6 is pretty good. So that way these mushrooms are pretty much in focus, maybe even turn up a little bit more to like a 0.7. So these mushrooms are pretty much in focus, but then in the background there, it gets quite blurry. All right, so that's really good. So I'm going to hold down the Z button and go into the solid view so it's a little bit less laggy. So now I want to create some really big mushrooms, and I want to put those mushrooms way there in the background, and they will be pretty blurred, but there will be just some big mushrooms in the background. So I'm going to select this object, hold down the Shift key, select this object, and then right back over here on the side, I can press Shift D to duplicate, bring this over here. I can press S to scale, and let's scale this way up, make this really big, and then I can press the 0 on the numpad to go into the camera view. And then I can press G to grab, and I'm going to bring this over, and I can also rotate it. So hit R to rotate, and I'm going to rotate it on the Z axis and just kind of move it over and scale it up. I can also select this object and double tap the R key. That's going to enable the trackball rotation, and I can just kind of rotate it right there. So I can hold down the Z button and go up into the rendered view just to see how that's looking. And I think I want it to be even more blurred, so I'm going to bring it even farther back, and if it's farther away from the camera, it's going to be more blurred. So I'm going to bring it even farther, maybe also bring the ground back a little bit by just selecting the ground and moving it back so it's even more blurred. I just want them to be very blurry and in the background, just to kind of give the idea that there are more mushrooms, maybe even bigger mushrooms in the background. Maybe these are like giant mushrooms, like the size of trees. So I can select the object, hold down the Shift key and select this object, and I can press Shift D to duplicate, and then I can scale this one down and rotate it. So I'm going to rotate it on the Z axis and just kind of give it a random rotation. Maybe move it back a little bit, and then I can press Shift D to duplicate and S to scale, press the 0 on the numpad again to go into the camera view, and I can hit R to rotate it on the Z axis, just kind of give it a random rotation, and just kind of rotate this object around just to make some mushrooms there in the backdrop. Maybe I'll even scale up the center one to make it a bit bigger, and then I can kind of move this one over to the side, something like that. All right, so now you can see we have those mushrooms there in the background, and then we also have the dirt there in the background. And I also need to scale the dirt up, so I'm going to press S to scale it on the Z axis and make it a bit bigger, and also maybe move it down a little bit. All right, there we go. Now, because we are setting up the composition, I only want to be able to see what the camera can see. So I'm going to select the camera, and then I'm going to go right down here to the viewport display on the camera settings. So open up the viewport display. Now on the pass apart out, I want to turn this value all the way up to 1, and that way we can only see what the camera can see, and that way we can just kind of get a better idea of what the composition is looking like. And so you can move any of these objects around now if you need to. All right, now if you zoom in here, you can see there's still a lot of transparent areas. So I'm now going to be adding that background image that I talked about at the beginning of the tutorial. So to add in the background image, I'm going to be using the import images as planes add-on, and it's built into Blender. So if you don't have it enabled, you can just click on edit, and then you can open up the preferences. And then right over there, if you click on the add-ons tab and go to the search here, you can search for images, and you can see there is the import images as planes. So just check mark that, and then you can close the user preferences. So now that we've turned on that add-on, I can press Shift A, and let's go right down here to image, and then I'm going to click on the images as planes. And link is in the description if you'd like to download this free forest image. So this is a free image from Pixabay. So I downloaded the highest resolution version from Pixabay. So click on the forest once you've downloaded it. And then I'm going to click right over here on emit because I want this to be an emission. And then once you've clicked on that, you can click on import images as planes. And then that's going to import that image as a plane. And again, you can see for some reason it added it into the grass and mushrooms collection. So let me just open this up, and you can see here's the forest image. I'm going to click and drag and drop it into the first collection, and then we can close this. And you can also just click on this collection right here, and that's going to kind of make a little circle around it, and I believe that'll make it so that when we add in other images or other objects, it'll put it in the main collection. All right, so just select the images as planes. Let's hold down the Z button and go back into the solid view, and then I'm going to press G to grab and move this way out, and then I'll press S to scale and scale it up really big. So I want it to be really big, and I want it to be behind all of these mushrooms here. So I'll press the 0 on the numpad to go into the camera view, hold down the Z button and go up into the rendered view, and you can see now it just looks like the mushrooms are in a forest. And I'm going to scale it up even bigger, and then you can press G to grab and just kind of move it around and just find somewhere that looks good. So find some place where you kind of like how the leaves look and the trees look. So I like something like that. Now I don't want it to be this very bright green color. I want it to match the colors of this forest. So I'm going to click right over here on the shading tab and then press 0 on the numpad to go into the camera view. And then I'll hold down the Z button and go up into the rendered view. So this is the forest. If I just drag this out, you can see here's the forest image and it's going into the emission. So I can actually change the colors in here, and then we can make the colors fit the scene better. So I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search here, and I'm going to search for the RGB curves node, and let's drop the RGB curves node right in here between the color and the emission. So we can use this to do some color correction to the image. All right, so the first thing that I want to do is make the background much darker so that you can really just focus on these main mushrooms. The stuff in the background I want to be pretty dark so you're not going to notice it too much. So let's take the RGB curves, let's go to the C here, click on the C, and I'm going to make that much darker. So click and drag, and that's going to add a little dot there, and then we can make this much darker, something like that. And then let's click right here on the R for red, and I'm going to drag this up a bit because making it a bit more red is going to make it a bit more purple as well, and I do want it to be a bit more purple so it kind of fits the colors of the scene. Let's click here on the G for green, and I'm going to add a little bit more green as well, but not too much. And then let's click here on the B for the blue, and I'm going to make this much stronger, so I'm going to drag this up quite a bit to add a bunch more blue. So bring that way up, and now you can see how that's looking. So you can see it's very bluish and purplish, and that fits the colors of the scene a lot better. Maybe go back here to the C and just make it a bit darker. So something like that is pretty good. So I want to make everything in the background even darker just so that it's not as distracting. You're not really going to notice as much, and it's just going to be background elements. I really want the viewer to just be focusing on these main mushrooms here. So to make everything darker in the background, I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to Mesh, and then I'm going to add a plane. Hold down the Z button, go back into the solid view, and I'm going to press G to grab, and then S to scale, and then I'm going to press R to rotate, and let's rotate it on the X-axis, and I'm going to type in 9, 0, and enter to rotate it over by 90 degrees, and I'll scale it up a bit. And I can press the 0 on the numpad to go into the camera's view. I can hold down the Z button and go back into the rendered view. So now we have this giant plane here in the background, and so I'm going to create a new material, and we're going to set it to transparent. So I'm going to click on new here to make a new material. I can just call this transparent. So I'm going to click on the principled BSDF shader, and I'm going to press X to delete it. I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for the transparent shader. Let's plug the transparent shader up to the surface. Now we can't see through that, and that is because we are in Blender Eevee, so we need to go right here to the material properties, and under the blend mode and shadow mode, I'm going to change these both to alpha hashed, and that way we'll actually be able to see through the transparency. So now if we make this color darker, it's going to be less and less transparent, but then if we turn it up, you're going to be able to see through it better. And I want to make it pretty dark so that now the background is much less visible, and you can't see it very well, but you can see it just a little bit. So there we go. Now you can still see the background, but it's much less visible, and your main focus is really on these mushrooms here in the front. Alright, so I'm now going to be setting up some more lighting. So I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to go right down here to light, and I want to add a spotlight. I'm going to go back over here to the layout to do this, and I'm going to hold down the Z button and go back into the solid view. And I'm going to drag this a bit smaller so this is a bit bigger. Alright, so I'm now going to press G to grab and place it there, R to rotate and just rotate that up, and press period on the numpad to zoom over to the light. So I just want to rotate the light and kind of place it right there so it's kind of coming down on the 3D scene. And then let's go back into the camera view, and I'll hold down the Z button and go back into the rendered view so I can preview that. So then right over here, let's click on the object data properties, and I'm going to turn the strength much higher to make that brighter. So I'm going to change the power right here to like 5,000, and that way it's going to be very, very bright. And then I also want to change the color. So let's click on the color right here, and I just want to make this kind of like a bright blue color. So something like that, just a bright blue. Now I want to make it look like there is sunlight kind of coming through a forest. And so I want to add kind of a texture to make it look like there are little bits of leaves and the light is coming through the trees in the forest. So I'm going to hold down the Z button, go back into solid view. So what I'm going to do is press Shift A, and I'm going to go right up here to mesh, and I'm going to go down here and add a circle. Let's press G to grab. We're going to bring the circle up, and then S to scale, and I'm going to scale it up. I'm now going to tab into edit mode, and then I'm going to press the F key, and the F key is going to fill a face there, and then I can tab to go back to object mode. So let's press R to rotate, and basically I'm going to stick this right here so that this light is going through, so it's going to shine through this object. So then what we can do is we can just create a texture, and then we can have it shining through that texture. So now let's go back over here to the shading tab, and I'm going to click on new here to add a new material onto this object, and let's also bring this up a little bit so the camera can't see it. You can see the camera can see it a little bit, so I'm going to double tap the R key. That's going to turn on the trackball rotation, and I'll just bring that up. Alright, hold down the Z button, go back into the solid view, just make sure that's looking good, and then I want to preview this, so hold down the Z button and go into the rendered mode. So just make sure the light is shining on that object. So I've added a material to this object. Let's actually name this to like leaves. Just going to rename this material to leaves. So what I want to do is I want to have a principled, but then I also want to have a transparent so that some parts are transparent and the light can go through it. So I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search here, and I'm going to search for the transparent BSDF, and let's just drop the transparent BSDF right up here. And then I want to mix these two shaders together, so I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for a mix shader, and let's drop the mix shader right down here. So then let's plug this transparent into the bottom shader, and the principle can go into the top one. Now I need some sort of texture to tell it where it's going to be transparent and where it's going to be principled. I don't just want to use the factor value, I want to use a texture. So I'm going to press Shift A, and let's go to the search here, and I'm going to search for a noise texture, and let's put the noise texture right here. We can actually bring it up here. So I want to plug the factor into the factor of the mix shader. And then also with the noise texture selected, I'm going to press Ctrl T, and that is going to add the texture coordinate and mapping nodes. And then what I want to do is just take the object, and we're going to plug that into the vector, and we are going to be using the mapping node later to animate this value in the next part, so we're going to leave the mapping node. But I do want to use the object coordinates. All right, now you can't really see it taking effect, and that's because we need to make it more contrasty. So I'm going to press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and let's just drop the color ramp right here after the noise texture. So I can now drag these together, and that's going to make it more contrasty, and now you can really start to see where it's transparent and where it's not. Now I want to play around with the noise texture, so let's change the scale. I'm going to turn the scale up to like a 40 so that there is much more scale, and that is going to look really good for those leaves. Now the light still isn't coming through, and that is because right down here we are using Blender Eevee, and so Eevee isn't as realistic, so we need to tell it to use the transparency. So on the blend mode right here, I'm going to change this to alpha hashed, and on the shadow mode I'm going to change this to alpha hashed. So now if I zoom in there, you can definitely see there's some shadows there where the texture is. Now I do think this texture is a little bit too big, so I'm going to turn the scale down to maybe just like a 30. I think a 30 or maybe even like a 25, that would be better. Now you can see as Eevee loads up, it kind of disappears and you're not able to see it as good. So what I'm going to do is click back here on this light, and then I'm going to go to the light settings. Now right here on the radius, I'm going to turn the radius down. And when you make the radius smaller, now that's going to be much more sharp and I can see that much better. Whereas if the radius is turned up, everything is going to be much more smooth. So I'm going to make sure the radius is turned all the way down. And then let's click back on this object right here. I also want to play around with the color ramp a little bit. So I'm going to drag this over and just kind of play around with this and just change it to the amount of shadows that you like. So something like that is probably pretty good. Let's press the 0 on the numpad, go into the camera view, see how that's looking. And I think I want to turn the scale even farther down. So let's turn the scale down to just like a 15, and that is better. All right, so I now want to just duplicate this light and put it a few different spots. So I'm going to select the light and then hold down the Shift key and select the texture. I'm now going to press Shift D to duplicate, and then R to rotate, and G to grab. And I'm going to put another light right here behind the mushrooms. And you can see there's that really cool look there, so it looks like there is light shining through those leaves. Let's press Ctrl S again to save. Now if I select this light and then go right over here to the color, I want to change the color of this light. So I'm going to change this light to a bright green color, and this is going to give it kind of that fantasy magical look, having like a blue light and a green light. So you can see how that's looking. So if I press the 0 on the numpad, you can see there's kind of a blue light here, and then there's kind of a yellow light here, and I do really like how that looks. All right, so I'm now going to select the texture and Shift select the light again, and I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate this. We're going to make one more light. And then I'll rotate this light over, and we're going to have this light kind of on the side, more down where the camera is, and then rotate it over. I'm going to press the 7 on the numpad to go to top view, and I'm going to rotate this light over and kind of stick it right here, pointing on the side, just pointing right there. So something like that is pretty good. Let's press 0 on the numpad, go into the camera view. I think I want to rotate this back a little bit so it's not quite as direct. So something like that. And then on this light right here, I'm going to select this light, go to the color, and I'm going to change this to a blue color because I want it to be kind of a blue color. I actually want it to be the same blue color as this light. So if I just select this light, I can just hover my mouse over this color and press Ctrl C. That's going to copy it. Click on this light here, hover my mouse over the color and press Ctrl V, and that is going to paste that color. All right, there we go. So we now have some blue lights over here and some green light over there. And then in the camera view, I'm able to see that texture. So I'm going to click on that texture, and then I'm just going to double tap the R key and just kind of rotate it up just so that you can't see it in the camera's view. I'll press the period on the numpad to zoom into it, and I just want to make sure that light is being covered by that texture, so you can kind of scale it up and move it if you need to, but I don't want to be able to see it in the camera's view. All right, so I now want to add some rim lights. So let's click right back over here on the layout, and I'll press 0 to go into the camera view. So I want to add some really cool like purple rim lights to make it look kind of fantasy and give it that magical look. So I'm going to press Shift A, and to add the rim lights, I'm going to go right here to light, and I'm going to add an area light. And then I'll press the period on the numpad to zoom into the area light. I'll press G to grab. I'm going to move it over. This scene is getting a little bit complex. There's a bunch of lines and stuff, but I just want to move this area light kind of over here on the back. So if you press 7 on the numpad to go to top view, I want to kind of move it over here. So I'm going to rotate it over, rotate it up, and press 7 on the numpad again for top view. And I want to rotate it so it's pointed at the light from right over there. All right, and then rotate it up like this. And then because this is a rim light, I want it to be going up and down. So right over here, if you go to the light settings, I want to click on the shape, and I instead want to change it to a rectangle. And then right here on the size, I'm going to drag the Y size and make it much longer, and that's going to be a lot better for a rim light. And then just make sure that line there is pointed right at the mushroom stem. And then hold down the Z button and go up into the rendered view. And I also want to maybe just bring this over just a little bit. And I want to bring this light over a little bit more and just make sure it's pointed right there at the mushroom stem. All right, hold down the Z button and go into the rendered view. So let's take the power, and I'm going to make the power quite a bit brighter. So I'm going to take the power and turn it up really high to like a 4000. So that is much brighter. And then you can see that it's lighting up the ground a lot. So let's take the Y, and we're going to make that actually a bit smaller so it's not quite that big, and kind of bring it up a little bit more. You can also double tap the R key to use the trackball rotation, and I want to make it so it's kind of pointed up there at the mushroom. And then let's click here on the color, and I'm going to make this a very bluish color. So make it a very bright, strong, bright blue color. So it's kind of going to be a dark blue color. Now if you zoom in there, you can see that it has that rim light right there, and we have that nice, bright, strong blue color. So I really like how that looks. And we also have that blue color right there on the side of the mushroom. And then I want to have another rim light on the other side, and I want to make that a purple rim light. So let's press 7 on the numpad to go to top view, and I can hold down the Z button, go into wireframe just so I can preview that a little bit better. So let's take this rim light, and I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate, and then R to rotate, and I'm going to rotate this light over and just kind of have it pointing at the mushrooms. And then let's press 0 on the numpad and go into the rendered view by holding down the Z button and going up into the rendered view. And then this light, which is coming from the other side, I want this light to be much more purple. So let's make it kind of a purplish pinkish color. And now you can see we have those really cool colors there. So we have like blue over here and then kind of pink over here. And it kind of looks magical and fantasy, almost a little bit sci-fi as well, kind of sci-fi-ish, but mushrooms are kind of more fantasy and medieval. All right, so this scene is really coming together. I do want to add a little bit of mist over the scene. So I'm going to hold down the Shift and S button and then move over to the cursor to world origin. That's just going to make sure the 3D cursor is in the center there. So I can now press Shift A, we can go to mesh and we can add a cube. And because the cursor was there in the center, the cube is in the center. So I'll press S to scale, and we're going to scale this way up. Let's hold down the Z button, go back into solid view because it is a little bit laggy in the rendered view. And then let's also press G to grab and hit Z to bring it up on the Z axis. And then I can scale this up, and we are going to make this so it pretty much fills the entire scene. So just like that. All right, so now let's go over to the shading tab, and right here on the shader nodes, I'm going to click on new, and I can just call this like fog. All right, so now instead of using the principled BSDF, I'm going to click on this and press X to delete it. I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search here, and I'm going to start to search for a volume, and let's add the principled volume shader. And then let's take the volume and we'll put that into the volume of the material output. So now you can see we have a bunch of fog there. Now it's way too strong, and so I want to actually use a noise texture to make some parts a little bit more foggy and then some parts less foggy. So let's press Shift A. I'm going to go to the search here, and I'm going to search for a noise texture, and let's just drop the noise texture down here, and I'll make this a little bit smaller. And then just select the noise texture, and I'm going to press Control T, and that is going to add the texture coordinate and mapping. And then we don't need the mapping, so I can just click on the mapping and press X to delete it. Let's plug the object up to the vector so that we can use the object coordinates. So I can now just take the factor from the noise texture, and we're going to put that into the density of the principled volume. Now it hasn't really changed that much, and so I want to make it more contrasty. So let's press Shift A. I'm going to go to the search here. Let's search for a color ramp, and I'm just going to drop the color ramp right here in between the noise texture and the principled. So I can now start to drag the black tab over, and as I drag the black tab over, now you're able to see that taking effect. So some parts are more misty or more foggy, and some parts are less foggy. And then let's also play around with the scale here. So I'm going to take the scale on the noise texture and turn that up to like a 10. So there's more scale. And then on the detail here, let's also turn this all the way up to the max, which is 15. So there's more detail. And then I want this fog to be even more subtle. So let's click right here on this white tab, and then I'm going to click on the color. And if I make this more dark, it's going to be more subtle. So if I turn this way down, now you're not able to see the fog at all. But if I turn it up, you're able able to see more and more of the fog. So I'm just going to make it kind of a dark gray color so it is more subtle, but you'll still be able to see it a little bit. And then you can play around with this color as well. Just kind of drag that back and forth to give it how much fog you want. So there we go. We now have a bunch of really cool fog. I do think that that scale is a little bit too big. So let's maybe turn the scale just down to like a 6. Something like that is probably a little bit better. So now we have little bits of fog all around there in the scene. All right, so we are almost ready to render out the final image, but there is just one thing that I want to tweak a little bit. These grass blades are very visible and they're very bright, and I also feel like they're a little bit too big. So what I'm going to do is hold down the Z button, go back into solid view, and I can actually go back here to the layout, and I'm going to zoom in here and just go inside the fog, and here are these objects. So I'm going to select these grass objects, so just hold down the shift key, select both of the grass objects, and I'm going to press S to scale, and I'm going to scale them quite a bit farther down. And then I'm going to press Control A and apply the scale. So now if I go into the camera view and hold down the Z button, go up into rendered mode, you can see those bits of grass are much smaller, and I think I like that a lot better. Although I do think the grass could be a little bit bigger, so I'll just scale that up a little bit, press Control A and apply the scale, and then go into the camera view and see how that's looking. So I think that is pretty good. And then I do just want to change the colors a little bit to make them a bit darker, so they're not quite as visible, they're not popping out quite as much. So let's go right over here to the shading tab, and I'm going to hold down the Z button, go into the rendered view, and I have the grass selected, so here is the grass material. So I want to take the base color and I want to make that a darker green color so it's not quite as visible. And then on the subsurface color, I also want to make that a little bit darker. So we're just going to make the grass a little bit darker, and it won't pop out as much and won't be as visible. So now the grass isn't popping out as much, you're just not able to see it as well. And so that'll really bring the focus more to these big mushrooms, and the grass object is just kind of a secondary element on the ground. So I'm going to click right here on the render properties, and I'm going to open up the bloom settings because I want to turn up the bloom a bit. So on this intensity right here, I want to turn this intensity value much more up so it's much more strong. And I actually want to turn this intensity value up to like a 0.2, so it's quite a bit stronger, maybe even like a 0.3. And then I want to also turn the radius down, so we can drag this radius down, and that's going to make the radius a little bit smaller so the glow is just kind of around these mushrooms. And then you can also change the color right here. So I'm going to click on this color, and I actually want to change the bloom color to kind of like a pinkish color, and that's going to make everything a little bit more purple. So you can play around with the intensity. You could even turn this up really big to like a 0.6 or something, maybe even turn it up to like a 0.7. I think that might look really cool. It might be a little bit too bright though. So if you want to turn the bloom down, maybe just like a 0.5, something like that is pretty good. And then you can play around with the radius to change the size of that bloom. So just play around with that till you get a bloom that you like. But I really like, if I zoom in there, I really like that there's like a glow around there, around the mushroom, and right there as well. So just press Control S again to save, and then to render the final image, you can press F12, and hopefully it won't take too long because this is in Blender Eevee. Now it is kind of a complex scene, so it might take a little bit, but it's definitely going to be faster than Cycles. And there we go, it finished. So it took my computer almost 9 seconds. So that is pretty long for Blender Eevee. That's kind of long, but this scene is pretty complex. There's all this bloom here, and there's all the different lighting and everything it has to calculate. So there we go. We now have this really nice final image here. So to save this final image, you can just click right up here on image, and then you can click on save as. And I'm just going to save this image as final render, and I'll just save it as a PNG file, and I'll save it in the folder with my other files, and I'll click on save as. And there we have it. So there is the final render. Now this tutorial series is not over because in part 3, we're going to be doing the animation. So we're going to be adding those little orbs or embers kind of floating around. We're going to be using a particle system for that in part 3. We're also going to be animating the texture there of those leaves to kind of make it look like the leaves is moving around a little bit. And then we'll also animate the camera just a little bit. And then once that is animated, we will render out all the frames and then compile that in Blender's video editor. So if this is all you want to create, then you can just finish it here. But if you want to create the little glowing orbs and embers and do the animation, then you can watch part 3. I will throw part 3 right up there on the end screen when it is released, and also the link will be in the video description. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you've been enjoying this so far, and I will see you in the last part, part 3.